each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempt the mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. My desperate hope tonight is that you can hear me. The constant struggle against my technological foes is ever increasing, and it seems like every single episode there's another problem. So if you are out there in listener land and you can let me know that everything is a-okay, that would be awesome. As far as all my instrumentation shows, you can hear me and things are fine, but I am just not sure. So hop over to YouTube or DLive. In fact, I've noticed that every once in a while on Facebook, I can see your comments now, but it doesn't seem consistent. So even if you're on Facebook, you could say, yes, I can hear you, or no, I can't, and that would be awesome. Of course, if you can't hear me, you don't know that I'm asking you to tell me so. And in the meantime, until I see some responses of people telling me whether they can hear me or not, I will just show you some things. I like to remind you guys that I do other stuff besides this show, and I love for you to know it. Thank you, Pearl, for telling me that the sound is good. I appreciate it immensely. What's up, Jeff Green, by the way? People in the chat, howdy. And, oops, that's not what I wanted to do either. What I want to do is show you... No, I just did this backwards. I will show you, I promise. You're kidding me. Okay. We'll see what you even see now. Oh, there. It's working, it's working. All right, what I would like to show you is my site. What's up, Susan Babudro? Nice to see you. Thank you for letting me know that you can hear. So you can hop over to CoreySharman.com, otherwise known as rogueways.org. Same site, different names. This is where my collection of my depository of every single thing that I do, it's all here at the hub. So whether you're a YouTube, a DTube, BitChute, I don't post much on those yet, but whether you're subscribed via those options or not, you can find everything here. I have some articles. I've got To Be a Warrior is my most recent poetic précis of a novel I read about Shambhala and some ideology surrounding that. Time Travel is another poem I wrote. Not a summary of any book, just a poem. Fuck Christianity is an article that I had fun writing. And there is much, much more over the years that's gathered there. You can purchase my novels. What's up, Chris? You're on YouTube. Nice to see you here. I've got 3 books. My first novel, Sine Curve of Aeons. It is a yuga traversing tale of good and evil and the slight imbalances that lead us astray in our progression through human evolution of consciousness. It's a fascinating exploration in a fictional world. It's very fun. You can get that in hardcover as well. I also have A Gypsy on the Res, which is my memoir from my time teaching on a Native American reservation. It is short, tiny little chapters and fun little vignettes of an irreverent and hilarious tone. And of course, Mutable Realia is my collection of poetry. It's a little bit old now, but it's still good. You can grab tarot readings from me. I just did another one today. I love providing tarot guidance for people. I am a true channel for your highest self or your allies to come through and express what they would like to express to you. People always find that they get deep insight and exploration of the issues in their life that they currently face. And so it's a cool way for you to be able to get in touch with some things you might not otherwise be in touch with. You can hop over to the shop area. Always ignore those messages that I get. You don't get them. That's just what it does to me. But I just added irreverent merch, and this is just a fun little side side thing I'm doing. By the way, all the photography is mine. I'm a bit of an artist as well, but I am not a very good artist of shirts, but I did want to make these because I said I would, and so you can grab a men's or women's I survived the coronavirus and all I got was this stupid police state, and the science is not dogma, also in men's or women's of various colors and sizes if you're interested in that. So that's new to the shop. If you've been to the shop, you haven't likely seen that, so you might want to go check it out if you're interested in those things. Under classes and tarot, you can find, of course, my tarot readings and classes that I teach. I teach Finding Your Spiritual Allies. I teach Psycho-Spiritual Protection from all the baddies out there. I do one-on-one guidance sessions if you're not into the tarot reading, but you do want to go deeper into the aspects of your life that you might be trying to get in order. And right now I am having a sale on my book, Vitalis. The other link I showed you shows you the Amazon page, and they sell it, of course, for $15 and tax and shipping. And I am selling it right now for $10, including shipping, no tax. Anywhere in the US, I will send that to you for $10. This is the cheapest it's ever going to be, and I have 7 left, it looks like. So if you are interested in this book and possibly grabbing it, they will never ever be even close to this price again. It will be $15 or more depending on what they do. They're changing some things always, of course. So grab that while you can. And lastly, in the shop, I just want to point out that I do have a few Orgonite pendants left. If you want to look at those, they're beautiful Orgone energy accumulators. And then, of course, my Rogue gear. You can grab shirts, sweatshirts, laptop, whatever, laptop covers, I don't know, whatever the case is, mugs like the one I am frequently drinking out of on the show, and other Rogue gear. If you want to support the show, these are fantastic ways to do it. But the best way to support is through... Sorry, I just laughed because Dominic in the chat said no sound and I almost died. And of course he was kidding. Thank you. We got to keep it light in here because this shit gets wild. Just another person just today told me that they had to resubscribe to the channel. People are constantly telling me this, that they have to resubscribe. So, you know, I often wonder, without all the fuckery that I have, the shadow banning and the unsubscribing and all of that shit, like how would I be doing without all that suppression? It'd be like really cool to know. But of course there's no way of knowing. But good one, Dominic. So on Subscribestar is the best way to support me. Of course, this is a monthly subscription. I encourage every single person out there, if you found value in Rogue Ways and what I do this for free, basically. I make very, very little money on this. It definitely does not support me even. I almost always every year have just barely broken even. For a year or so, I didn't even break even. I was just in the hole. And now I'm up to maybe like $100 a month. It's almost nothing that I do, and I provide a lot of content. So if you have found value in any of that content, at least consider subscribing at the dollar level. Everyone can afford $1 a month, and you know, $1 a month from enough people is a really good amount of money. So that would be neat to see more people at that level. You can also look into the different levels available and see if those appeal to you. I do have one person at the $55 level, and it sounds like a lot, but if you are someone who would like a monthly tarot reading, it's actually $5 off the price, plus you get access to specific content only available on Subscribestar. So there are perks at every level that might be what you are into. And sometimes I do giveaways of various things that I create and craft, so it's a fun place to be involved. And also it guarantees that if I got deleted from YouTube, you would still have access to me and know where I went to next. Speaking of, please find me on DTube and BitChute. I should probably start including those links in my YouTube description so people can find it. And SoundCloud, of course, is where I host my audio files for the podcast. If you're subscribed to the podcast, you don't need this. If you're not, but you want the audio files, you can come here and just download them or listen to them. So that is another option for you. All right, party people. Today we're going to talk about groupthink. And we're going to do this for some key reasons. We're going to come back to these, but, you know, we've seen in Minneapolis, there's this rioting going on due to the murder of George, I forget his last name, who is a civil rights lawyer, actually. How convenient is that? And this article is just explaining that there will be a robust criminal investigation conducted into Floyd's death. And of course, we hear this every time the cops murder someone. And every time we are pretty disappointed at the outcome. It turns out when you investigate your own group, You don't tend to find much wrongdoing. Fancy that. Oh, thank you, Chris, for following me on DLive and BitChute. That is very nice. I know you're not a stalker. You're just an awesome person. And thank you, Dominic. That's awesome. I didn't know that many people did. I should probably ramp those up a bit and start posting more videos there. But yes, so I didn't even know a man was shot to death Wednesday night. Minneapolis? Who writes these things? They need to hire me. In another day of protests over the death of a black man in police custody. You know, every time they're highlighting the race and the color of the either the police or the victims, I have to wonder what their agenda is. We all know they have an agenda, and we all know that they love divisiveness and pitching us against one another. So while I do recognize that racism exists and is often rampant and definitely creates a bias in many police activities, us as people should recognize that using race to divide us is a tactic, and we should be aware of it. So anytime race is specifically focused on, we should treat it legitimately and also stay calm and ask ourselves, you know, does this divide me against my fellow human, or does it just point to truth? And so it's usually a mix of both, so we just want to be aware. But obviously there was some rioting and some looting. We have various different groups involved, and the groupthink affects every group involved. So we have that going on. Obviously, the riots turned violent. Look at this video is 3 minutes and 3 seconds, 33 encode perhaps. Thousands of protesters in the street, violence, fires. I saw the video of the fire today, and it was like the entire frickin' downtown was just in flames, which was crazy. You know, and we see the same sort of dynamics and arguments as we see every time a police person kills a regular person. But it was pretty fucked up to watch. The guy had his knee on his throat, and the other guy was saying he can't breathe, which is interesting. I don't know if you've ever been choked. I have. You definitely cannot talk when you cannot breathe. So he could breathe. I understand saying I can't breathe because you're having difficulty breathing. So I'm not saying that he shouldn't have said that or that he actually couldn't breathe well. It is just one of the many details you might want to keep in your mind, that you can't talk if you're actually choking or being choked and cannot breathe. You can't make sound without air flowing through your esophagus. So just one of the interesting details that has sort of, you know, become a question, because the question is, who actually perpetrated this? Is it 100% real, or is it something created to get us all fired up and active? It's hard to say. And it honestly could be both. And so we'll get into all of that, and all of it has to do with the psychology around groupthink. Look at those fires. I mean, that's a fucking lot of damage. It's interesting. And I also always go to, you know, what's the you know, I get when you're angry, you act out, and there's not a lot of logic to it, but how is burning down entire buildings helping you? But again, if you feel hopeless and you feel oppressed, and the cops often kill your brethren or members of your group, then, you know, it's hard not to react violently and angrily. So I also understand. But I like to look at as many sides as possible. I like that slogan, "Rest in Power." That's cool. So yeah, there's a lot to this. We're gonna get into a lot of the different aspects of groupthink that have to do with this, so that we can better understand it from multiple points of view. Getting heated up in here. I would play you these videos, but I don't know if the audio works. Actually, let's try it. You tell me. It worked once, it didn't work the next time, and then maybe it'll work again. It's a test. Dude, I hate when it takes you to a new freaking site. Or did it not? Or is it just not willing to? Okay, here we go. And I promise you, I pay for like $100 a month worth of internet, and it's supposed to be like the highest speed shit, and yet I have these problems all the time. Isn't it nice? I guess Australia has it worse though, so I should be lucky. Third world problems. No, sorry, first world problems. Let's see who we've got while we're waiting to see if the video loads. We have Dominic Hawkins up in here. It looked like he intended to snuff him. And that could be part of it too. It could be like that guy is real. It actually, you know, he actually got murdered, but that the cops set out on a mission to kill someone to stoke a race riot. Chris points out how silly it is to riot and loot because someone got murdered. Again, it's a convenient excuse, and it's partially wrapped up in a very real anger and emotional response, but it's also not a very fair, it's not justice. It's like they want us to rise up. Dominic says, yes, it is like that. It's like they want us to rise up violently, specifically, because violence is a tactic they know exactly how to respond to, and they know exactly how to spin it. Screw this fucking video. Fuck you, video. We're moving on. And we're also closing you so that you don't start playing in the random middle of shit. But I'll continue. He did wee himself. It looked real. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't see that. But if you did pee yourself, it would definitely be a lot more likely to be real. That's a hard thing to act. And people do generally evacuate their bowels and bladders when they are dying. So that's very sad to notice. Peaceful protests would be great, Chris says, and fine and welcome. Rioting and looting and burning buildings, not so much. Yeah. Shannon points out nothing is random. I doubt this is. And that's very, very possible. And you have to consider, too, that even if this is a totally real thing, none of the actors in the initial scenario were actors, but were rather just people, you know, actually like cops on a power trip and a dude doing whatever and then the murder. That doesn't mean that they didn't then take this and sort of exacerbate it and are then using it to their advantage. That's a very common thing we see too. So I encourage people to not just decide, oh, it was a false flag, or like, oh, it was a whatever. I encourage you to be open-minded to it being very real and then also used against people, because that is very common. What's up, Chad Clemens? Sue Finelli in the house. Do I not always have a potty mouth? So let's look just at the basic psychology of groups. You know, we're group creatures. We're pack animals, you could say. And I say it often. We behave as a pack most easily, much more easily than we behave independently. This has awesome pros. Awesome plus side. Look at how these guys are making a Vesca Pisces. That's so cool. And also some downsides, some big downsides. So you can kind of wonder if the basis of humanity, you know, we needed groups to sort of survive. We had this need to belong, psychologically speaking, but also physically and economically speaking. Right? If we're traveling to a new location to start a new sort of like tribe or whatever, or a new settlement, then we definitely need a group that has a strong identity together and works together well and has a hierarchy and order and all of these things in order to make that work. And so as an evolutionary physical advantage, you could see why groups would be very important and would develop psychological corollaries that reinforce that behavior so that we are likely to survive. It makes sense, right? We humans consistently seek inclusion over exclusion. We hate to be outside of a group for these exact reasons. If you're kicked out of a group at the tribal level, in an evolutionary scale, you know, if that's a real thing, then you die. You're out of luck. You know, you're going to be out in the jungle by yourself, and you're going to be very less likely to have enough food and shelter and enough people to fight off the tigers or whatever you want. However you want to think about that, it's a lot harder to survive alone. And so so people fear exclusion and ostracism, and it's almost, you know, in our psychology, it's almost akin to dying when you're kicked out of a group, because some part of you remembers, you know, the epigenetic memory that you might die if you get kicked out of the group. So we have a very strong inclination to be in groups and to do anything we can to stay in groups. So don't beat yourself up if you have suffered this affliction of desperately wanting to be part of a group. It is incredibly normal. So much so that we actually have to work intentionally to be aware of and fight against that if we no longer want all of the things that come along with desperately wanting to be a part of a group. So as it points out, groups not only satisfy the need to belong, they also provide members with information, assistance, and social support. As we said, there's a lot of things that go along with it. Interestingly, of course, when you're in a group, you develop identity with that group. And we know how interesting and dangerous identity can be. This is what you think about yourself and who you are, and how you determine what value lies in which aspects of your identity. So, basically the answer to the question, who am I? Who am I, right? We want to know who we are. We develop an identity, and it has a lot to do with the memberships in different groups that we have decided that we have, or that we have been shown that we have based on what people are doing around us. Sometimes we're not even aware of our idea as a member of a group until it is sort of taken away from us or questioned, and then we're like, oh wow, I didn't even know I thought of myself in this way. So, let's see what's up. Steve Mercer's in the house. What's up, Steve? We got a lot of people here tonight. It's good to see you all. So they say even demographic qualities such as sex or age can influence us if we categorize ourselves based on these qualities. I would argue that especially in our hyper identity focused world right now that we do that. Absolutely. All of us. I don't know anybody who doesn't think of themselves as a member of the group of their sex or their age or anything else. And sometimes those things are skewed. Like sometimes people who are 50 still think of themselves as part of the young, hip 20-year-old group or whatever. It's all very subjective. But I think that we can say safely in our modern society that most of our group identity is based up is tied up in demographics. So as it points out, we don't just classify other people into such social categories, we do it to ourselves. I think that's pretty obvious. We do it to both other people and ourselves. And of course, we talked about the evolutionary advantages of that. We solve problems in groups, we create products, we create standards, we communicate knowledge, we have fun, we perform arts, we create institutions, and we ensure our safety. Again, it sounds obvious, but you have to think about all these things as we move forward into the other aspects we're going to look at, and how these all end up playing a role in a pretty possibly negative way as well. We'll get into some of this later, so we'll skim past some. Of course, we know that teamwork is something that a lot of people enjoy and excel at. And teamwork overcomes some of the shortcomings that a group might have as opposed to an individual as far as efficacy goes, which we'll talk about too. I like that they've identified these stages of groups. We're not really going to get into this, but it's just fun to note that group developments have stages. Of course, first you're forming the group. Then you're going to storm it. You're going to work out disagreements and fights and criticisms, and it's almost like I think of the pecking order as being established here. Then you're going to have norming, right? You're going to see kind of what are the rules of the group, what gets you out of the group and in the group. And then you're going to start solving problems or accomplishing whatever goals the group came together for. And then usually groups kind of end, but we see a lot in our modern society that groups never end. And in fact, they get more and more strengthened through identity politics and such. They never adjourn, and that's one of the many dangerous things about them. And I hope that Chris is right and that being a part of a group doesn't define your core, as he says. If you're part of a group and that group goes against your core, you become more powerful if you reject that group. I hope for that. That's actually the goal of rejecting groupthink, is that you do act as an individual always, even if you identify as a member of certain groups, and that you don't let the group define you. But we'll see some of the disturbing ways in which that doesn't happen. And groupthink is a specific term, and this is not the limited term we are talking about in this episode. I just used groupthink myself as a way to describe all of the ways psychology and the group have a dynamic that affects our behaviors. But groupthink, you should know, and we should differentiate, is an actual psychological term to describe how groups that behave in a cutoff method where they're not immersed in the larger society, they kind of act behind closed doors, and so they get kind of insular and they lose sort of perspective, and then they end up making really horrible decisions. And it's interesting, you can look into the psychology behind this and the studies, you can decide what you think, but I think a lot of this was sort of created to dispel conspiracy theories. So that could be its whole own episode, the history of the idea of groupthink. But it is, I mean, either way, there's some sound logic in there too. So, you know, it could go both ways. And that's our basic overview of groups. They do have some ideas about how to avoid groupthink, which is that very specific term that we just talked about a very insular group that's cut off and making decisions without the sort of interaction of the larger groups. And it just starts to talk about how, you know, if you're that cut off, and especially if you have any powerful, you start getting an illusion that you're invulnerable, right? You're not accountable. No one is watching you sort of make these decisions and interactions. And so you have this false sense of invulnerability. You know, if you're that insular and you're not interacting with the larger society, there could be a lot of beliefs and ideas that are going unquestioned, right? Because if you've developed a sort of pecking order and you have this internal cohesion and the leader says something and no one says anything against it, like you could just not even question that for a second. And that leads to a lack of critical thinking, obviously. If something then does come up that sort of promotes a questioning of beliefs or whatever, there could be a lot of rationalizing, like, well, no, I mean, that's okay though, because we're like this and like that, and it's okay. We've all seen this in action, especially in middle school, you know, in times when we had our sort of cliques, you know, and things would happen that were unfair, and we'd be mad at like another group of people for doing something, but then not care when we did it, or, you know, I'm sure you can sort of see this around you. You start stereotyping when you're in these types of insular groups that don't have any perspective. You stereotype, especially the people who aren't in your group. You're like, well, they're all like this. They're all like this. I did this a lot when I was pretty communist and very poor, and I stereotyped the rich constantly, and I had no interaction with the rich, and so that was my own type of groupthink that was very dangerous. I never went to go actually verify whether or not my ideas about wealthy people were true or not. I just stayed on my side and talked to other people of my group about it. And of course we agreed because we both wished that we weren't so poor. You do end up having self-censorship. So if someone in the group does have doubts or questions, but they're not in a position of power, then they hide that. And we see this going on in society right now a lot. A lot of people are self-censoring. I hear it all the time, like, well, I would say that, but I can't because my work or my friends or my family might be, you know, upset, and I just don't want to deal with it. And it's like, I'm not judging anyone, but this is, you know, a very negative aspect of identifying with that group of people that doesn't allow you the freedom of thought and speech. We definitely see the mind guards in action right now. These self-appointed censors. It was cool that today Trump signed the executive order to take the protected status away from any social media organization that engages in political suppression of information or censorship, because that is the highest level of mind guards that we've had, and it was terrifying to watch. And so maybe we'll see some relief, and maybe less of us will be sort of shadow banned, and maybe less stupid fact checking and censorship will go on in these places. That would be cool. And that's a hopeful thing. But even without that high level, we see people at our level, we see people all over society being mind guards and telling you, you know, they get angry at you when you say something they don't believe in. And it's ridiculous, and they don't realize how ridiculous it is to get angry at someone for stating an opinion, but you see it all the time. You see these attacks and logical fallacies just fly out of these people's mouths because they cannot handle people not adhering to their group think. They've made themselves the guards. What's up, Shakem Bush? Nice to see you. Totally junior high behavior. Illusions of unanimity. Again, if you are self-censoring and you have mind guards, and you do end up with the illusion that everyone agrees when in fact they don't, unless you're a rare sort of group that intentionally goes looking for the disagreements and makes it safe to disagree. Super rare. I don't even know if it's possible to exist. I've seen it in my own groups because I'm a fucking army of rogue warrior as one, but I don't know how common it is in reality. And then, of course, direct pressure, like actual kind of threats. This is like indoctrination almost. Like, if you don't believe this or you don't do this, then you're going to get kicked out of the group. You're not loyal, you're a traitor, or you don't understand. Whatever excuse they make for themselves, they'll find a way to ostracize you. And that, of course, as we talked about, feels like a death sentence to some aspect of your mind. So it's very effective. Of course, they have to point out there's a benefit. If you're working in a group this insular, you can make decisions real quick and real effectively, but you can also make really bad decisions that are not balanced or and have no sort of what am I trying to say? Perspective. So, some interesting quotes. Seneca, cool dude. He says, "For it is dangerous to attach oneself to the crowd in front, and so long as each one of us is more willing to trust another than to judge for himself, we never show any judgment in the matter of living, but always a blind trust, and a mistake that has been passed on from hand to hand finally involves us and works our destruction." Super important quote. I do feel like this is all working towards our destruction and that we don't see it or question it enough. Of course, I feel like a lot of the people I'm talking to right now do really see this, and so that's cool, but it also will be interesting to see the different aspects that are possibly playing into this. It's easier to resist it if you see the specifics of it. So I like this quote as well. "The tribe often thinks the visionary has turned his back on them, when in fact the visionary has simply turned his face to the future." This is often the case, right? That whole thing where like first they laugh at you and then they fight you and then they win and then they praise you as a genius and wonder why you died poor. So let's look at really quickly at groupthink and mass hysteria. This is a fascinating one. Again, I almost feel like this is a cover for some actual conspiracies perhaps, but who knows? Many times throughout history we've had incidences of supposed mass hysteria, also known as epidemic hysteria, mass psychogenic illness, and mass sociogenic illness. So mass hysteria is sort of the colloquial term. And it's a constellation of symptoms suggestive of organic illness, but without an identifiable cause, that occurs between two or more people who share beliefs related to those symptoms. It's interesting. We've seen this in, they often bring up the witch trials, and they say that was a mass hysteria. Sometimes they bring up there's like a laughing sickness that some girls in a school in Africa got. There was a dancing sickness also somewhere in Africa, both of which like the people afflicted by it couldn't stop either laughing or dancing, and more people started to sort of get it and join in. And so part of me feels like this is their convenient explain it away. It's just this psychological groupthink, and because of the power structures and all of the aspects we just talked about with groupthink, because of that, and this sort of you have to do this the way or else you're not going to be part of the group. Then once the powerful person started laughing uncontrollably, like so did everyone else. It could be that. I just also think there could be paranormal aspects going on. I think there could be actual, some kind of like poison or drug, that these people are all something environmental that is causing this, that's unidentified as of yet. And it could be either or both. And so, again, I think it's a convenient excuse, but it's one possible result of groupthink that is sort of interesting. What's up? Wisdom Trek. Wisdom Trek says, "See, they're running a script and they're contriving events to produce certain desired outcomes." Exactly. That's why we want to rip apart groupthink and really look into what could be happening. He continues, "So for instance, Trump, never forget what he said, everyone must get the shot, mandatory vaccinations." There's a lot of information that leads us to think that there could be mandatory vaccinations coming. I went over a lot of it in my most recent episode concerning these things. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the most recent one that has to do with COVID and all this stuff. So if you want to go check that out. it's not looking very good for us. Lacey Mariposa, what's up? Tuned in for a bit, doing bedtime, of course. Your beautiful children are amazing. Weird. Lacey said that this show randomly stopped and buffered for a long time and then switched to a jock podcast. Of course. I'm telling people, like, I realize I'm not a huge deal, but I also get fucked with constantly. Because my NSA agent, Chad, he just loves to fuck with me. So yeah, don't always just assume that mass hysteria is actually groupthink. It could very easily be many other things, but that's an interesting thing to look at. So this is interesting too. De-individuation theory was developed to explain the violence and irrationality of the crowd. So de-individuation, you can just look at the word and kind of understand what it means. You are an individual, you see yourself as individual, but you de-individuate when you join a group and give up your identity basically as you and take on an identity as a member of this group. So it's based around that idea. How does a group of seemingly, normal individuals become an unruly mob? According to de-individuation theory, the anonymity and excitement of the crowd makes individuals lose a sense of individual identity. As a result, crowd members cease to evaluate themselves and they become irrational and irresponsible. All of this makes the crowd fickle, explosive, and prone to anti-normative and disinhibited behavior. We have all seen this over and over and over again, whether it's a false flag, whether it's a well-timed crisis that they're exploiting and there's agent provocateurs planted, or whether it's a football game in England and your team lost and you go riot. There's a lot of times you see this when it's not engineered. And so it's an important thing to understand that if you, again, have given up your identity to the group and you are more a part of the group than you are yourself, then you can get caught up in this momentum and just start fighting or running. There was a time when I was at a protest in Seattle that I had organized. Oh, what's up? Lori Taylor's in the house. Woo! Andrew Bersano is here. And Andrew points out, if there was to be no use of force, there would be no need for the use of military. We all know how to find a vaccine station if we want one. That's a good point about the mandatory vaccinations. People in England wouldn't riot over a football game, and people in Spain might, though. They both have, and same within Istanbul and many places in the world, South America, all over, people go nuts about sports. But anyway, I was in Seattle. I was at a protest that I helped organize. I don't even remember what we were speaking about. I think it might have been J20 Day, which is January 20th, which is an anti-police violence and police murder activist sort of holiday almost. And so we were doing our thing, and we were at a college, and for some reason, our leader, which I think is dangerous to have most of the time, but our leader of that protest, he all of a sudden was like, the cops have been called, and they're coming, and we need to go. We need to, like, take this to the streets. And he just started running with a flag of the Communist Party. And all the people I was with started chasing after him. So I stopped and was like, oh my God, we have to run. And I ran. And then I stopped after running for a minute. And I was like, wait, why the fuck are we running from the cops? We didn't do anything. Like, we didn't break any laws. And I get that cops can kill people and often do, but they don't every time. And most of the times I've interacted with them, they haven't killed anybody. So I just stopped and was like, why are we running? I just realized that I got caught up in this very illogical, sudden decision full of emotion because my group did it. And luckily I was just randomly struck with some reason and I stopped and saw through this. But that's, I think, very rare for me and for anyone to stop in the midst of a heightened state of emotion where you're identified with a group and the group is acting in a certain way and to say, I don't actually want to behave in this way right now. But if you're de-individuated, then that's almost impossible to do, right? Because you don't have an individual identity in that moment. You have a group identity only. Trey Clark Theories, thank you so much for the super chat. I very much appreciate that. That is awesome. Shakim Bush makes a very good point. If everyone was armed to the gills, there could be no mandatory vaccinations. That's absolutely true. If any of them even come on my property, I will say, get off my property. I am armed and you are warned. Scott Cook, what's up tonight? Good to see you. Thank you for telling me I'm a big deal. So, yeah, there's de-individuation in that sense. It's a common actor in group identity and group action. And they go into a lot. This is actually a very cool site. This is iresearchnet.com. I like it. It's very fact-based. There's not a lot of analysis or opinion involved, and that's cool. And it sort of reads like academic texts, which are easy for me. You know where to find the main ideas and skim through the rest, so that's nice. But so systematic research of crowds throughout history shows that Le Bon, that's the guy who originally did the de-individuation research that we're talking about, that his characterization of crowds was actually wrong. Although almost everyone is appalled by lynch mobs, Kristallnacht, whatever that is, the Rwandan genocide, we should not let our horror and fears at the outcome cloud our analysis of the process. Violence in crowds is very rare and usually a last resort when other means of action are exhausted. So I'm glad they pointed this out, because it is good to keep in mind that just because a crowd or a group can have groupthink going on, just because they can get emotional or heated, and even when they get really sort of high energy, that doesn't mean that violence has to break out. Most people are not actually very violent. We have to be really, really coerced and pushed into violence to make it happen. And that's not to say it doesn't happen. It does happen. But, things like looting, pillaging, raping, burning buildings and stuff, it's not actually that common in just normal human interaction, even when they're in these sorts of emotional and group things. So it's cool that they pointed that out. We want to keep that in mind for the riots we're seeing right now, that it's actually not normal for it to break out into rioting. And so that is another indication that there may be something else going on. And so the implication they point out is profound, and that's that collective behavior can be under conscious control. And that just means that you can actually resist groupthink, and even the group itself can resist escalation without reason. The group itself can have cohesive reason, even in the face of emotion, even in the face of heightened activity. So take that to heart. That is a great thing to learn. And this is all based on, decades of psychological study. A lot of people just throw that all away and say, fuck psychologists, they're evil or whatever. And it's like, okay, but you can still look at, the data and take what you can from it. And I think that that's important to do. So keep it in mind, this can happen, groupthink can take over, but actually you can, even if you are de-individuated, you can snap out of that. And even if a crowd is heightened and de-individuated, they still most often resist violence and quite often can control themselves consciously. We take that to heart. People are mostly good. They really are. We just don't always see it because we are saturated in fucked up media and messaging. This is interesting, this diffusion of responsibility. It's a concept that has been studied. It's very fucked up. So first, consider a collection of persons, strangers, that face an unexpected situation, such as the threat of a person who is suddenly in distress. Intuitively, it is clear that each member of the collection of persons feels less responsibility to intervene in the situation than does a solitary individual who, knowing he or she is the sole witness, faces the same crisis alone. The solitary individual knows that if help is to come, it must come from him or her, while a witness who is a member of a crowd reasons that there are many other persons who could provide help. This exact psychological truth nearly got me killed. So, I'm in a bar and I am leaving the bar. You guys have to hear so many horror stories from me. I'm sorry. But it's a fascinating example of this psychological aspect, which I had no idea about at the time. But I'm just checking the chat real quick to see who's out there before I tell my little story. Lori, I love that you have a bow. What a good weapon to have. I really wanted to practice with the bow, but I fucking suck and I keep like hitting the string against my arm and and I'm a pussy, so. But I love it. I want to do it. I want to do more bow work. Shakim, my emphasis in life has actually always been on self-development. Yes, focus on that more. People who are all about guns to me aren't full people. Well, people who are all about guns and that's their life, I mean, that might be a bit limited, but people who have guns might be okay. I have a gun, right? Scott, Kristallnacht is the night of broken glass in Nazi Germany when they fucked with the business owners. Oh, thank you for clarifying that. Gotcha. What's up, digital apparition? Dude, I should build a bow. That'd be rad. I should build bow and build a bow and build arrows. Because then that's a skill that we can take with us into the apocalypse. Anyway, back to the story. Diffusion of responsibility as a psychological phenomenon. So I'm in a bar. There is a guy that I'm sort of like flirting with or hanging out with or dancing with or whatever. I don't really remember. And while I'm like talking to him and whatnot, and I've had a drink or two, like I'm not drunk, but I'm not totally sober. And I'm talking with this guy and flirting with him. Someone comes up behind me and like full on ass grab. Not just ass, I mean like his fingers were on my genitalia. Like that's how invasive it was. So as a saucy, spicy lady in the past, I have done this and so I did it again this time. I just turn around and punch whoever's behind me. So I punched this man in the face. Every other time I've done that, it was very effective. The person gets mad and fucking leaves and or whatever, you know, like it's effective. Most women don't really fight back. So this person, however, I almost instantly realized that it was a mistake because this person's eyes go from whatever kind of evil they were to like this heightened you know, like almost sexual response, like it turned him on or something. And he said, ooh, like, yeah, I like that. And I was like, oh, fuck, like, oh God, what have I done? And then he kind of like disappeared into the crowd and I continued, you know, hanging out with the other guy and eventually like, you know, it was getting later and my friend was going to meet me at my house. And so I was going to go back home. So I said goodbye to the guy, you know, got his number, whatever, leaving the bar, opening the door to leave the bar. As I'm stepping out and let go of the door, some arms come around me and they pin both of my arms to my sides. And so, of course, if this happens to you at any point in your life, for me at least, I just assume it's a friend of mine, kind of like coming up and bear hugging me from behind, because who else would ever touch me in that way or bear hug me from behind? So at first I'm like kind of laughing and like, who is it? Like trying to turn around. And then I quickly realized that it's not my friend because they're not letting me turn around and they're not letting go. Yeah, this story's fucked up if you don't, it gets fine. It's okay in the end, but it's not a fun story. But what's up, Brett? And rad. Scott Cook killed a deer with his bow last fall. That's fucking awesome. Nice job. So I am grabbed from behind and I realize it's not my friend and I'm being dragged away from the bar now, away from the entrance, you know, and it all happens very, very quickly. But I realize that I'm not safe and that this person is attacking me. I assume it's the guy, and it does turn out later to be the guy who grabbed my ass inside the bar. But there's people everywhere. So like, I don't even really like freak out at first. Cause I'm like, well, someone's going to get him off me. Like, obviously, there's people literally everywhere. It's a college town on like a Saturday night or something. There's like just people all over the street, all over the sidewalk, at least around the entrance to the bar. And I say, you know, like, help, like, get this guy off of me. And people just look at me blankly and no one moves. And he keeps dragging me. And now I'm like getting towards the edge of the crowd of people around the bar. And I'm like freaking out. And I'm like, no, seriously, like, help, like, get this guy off of me. Nobody does anything. Nobody even moves. People are making eye contact with me. They know that I'm serious. I think, like, you can't make eye contact with someone and not know that they're serious, but nobody moves or does anything. And so, no, nobody helped me. which blew my mind. Guys, it blew my mind in that moment. I was like, how are you not help? Like, I'm begging you. And then I start to feel like I'm in a bad dream or something, because why wouldn't anybody help me? And now I'm being dragged past the group of people, and I'm still trying to turn around, and now I'm crying and screaming, like, fully, because I'm, like, realizing if I get dragged away down the street by this guy and away from all the people, and I cannot get away from him, I'm fighting with, like, all my might, and I'm not a super large person, and I'm not a very strong person, but I'm also not weak, but I could not even budge. Like, he was way stronger than me. I couldn't get my feet to his nuts, like, nothing was working. And so no one helps me, even when I'm tears streaming, screaming, like screaming. Still no one does anything. So I feel like I'm in a nightmare now. I'm getting dragged down the street. Now we're far away from the group. Luckily, just on a random aside, I years before had just so happened to watch Oprah because my friend Kelly was an Oprah fiend, and I fucking hated Oprah. Like I hated most mainstream programming, but I was at her house and that's what she watched, so I just happened to be watching it, and it just so happened to be about being abducted as a woman, and this was years before. This was like 10 years before, and Oprah said, you never leave point A. Women who get abducted, who don't get away in that initial struggle, almost always die, or at least are never found again. So that's going through my head. Like, I'm going to be killed, or I'm going to be, like, worse. I'd rather be killed than the worse option, because I know there's worse things than death. And I remember she said, one of the only advantages you have, it's not even an advantage, one of the only options you have as someone who's much less strong than their attacker and assailant, which most women are, is to become a dead weight. And if you become a dead weight and you do it like sort of like quickly enough, like before they really you notice what you're doing, it's very hard to move a dead weight. I don't know why, the physics of it or the dynamics, but when you're struggling and sort of fighting, it's like easier for someone to carry you along. If you totally relax completely and you like just lose all tension in your body, they drop you because you become heavier. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's a true thing. So I remembered that from 10 years before or whatever, as I'm thinking about how I'm about to die and get raped and whatever, and I'm kind of like, dude, I have like one shot at this. Like, I have to like become a dead weight fully, which is hard to do when you're freaking out. Your body's tense, you're like ready to fight. It was very difficult to like prepare to turn off my body basically and like fall to the ground with abandon. Like you can't really imagine just like collapsing. But that's what I had to do, and I had never practiced it before. So, of course, like who would? But I did it. I became a dead weight. He did drop me just enough for me to like sort of wriggle out of his way. And as I ran, he reached out to try to grab me. He got my purse. I didn't even mean to not let him have it. I would have let it go because it's not important, but you're not really thinking at this point. You're just survival mode. So I managed to hold on to my purse, but that's how close he was to re-getting me, is my point, is that he had my purse for a second. And luckily at this point we were halfway down the block, away from the group of people, but right next to the door to the next bar. And so I ran into that bar, and I'm like obviously distressed, freaking out, like tears, whatever. And there's a bouncer there, which I'm like, sweet, like this guy is here to protect people. That's his job. And I'm like, dude, there's a guy, he's coming right behind me, like please protect me from him. And that guy looked at me in the eyes and laughed. And these people are not evil people, I realize now, looking back, because I understand now this psychological concept that we're talking about right now. But at the time, I, again, thought I was in a fucking nightmare and that this couldn't even be real because all those people in the crowd didn't help me. This guy is actually trying to kill me, and now this person's laughing in my face. And so I like freak out even more, and I just push past him into the bar, which thank God I got past him because I didn't even show my ID or anything. And there just so happens to be one seat open in the entire bar, and I sit in it, and there's a group of 3 guys sitting at the table, and I look at them and I say, please help me. No one will help me. There's a man coming behind me. He's already tried to abduct me, and I don't know what else to do. And they didn't even ask a question. They didn't even like stop to think. They just stood up and stood behind me, and he came in And I could see there was like a mirror in front of me, so I could actually see his face, which was even more terrifying. But he was like fucking pissed, and you could tell he wanted to fight these guys, and these poor innocent guys like just were ready to fight for me. And it was amazing. Thank God, after all of that, that there was someone who would help. And they just stood there, and they didn't even say anything to him. They just looked at him, and they just waited for him to like stop being angry, and then he left. Very, very nice guys. Sat with me while I calmed down, walked me home, like super awesome people. Thank God for them. But it took me a long ass time to get to the point where I understood why nobody helped me. I was clearly in danger, grave danger. I was clearly being abducted. By the way, the guy said to the group of people who didn't help me, "This is my girlfriend and we do this all the time. Ha ha ha." So they did have an excuse of like, I guess you believed that. I don't know. I still don't know why you'd hear me screaming and crying and let that go on. But I mean, there is something there. But I learned the main thing that went on is this exact psychological concept. And this is the diffusion of responsibility. Because it was a group of people outside the bar, that's why nobody helped me. If it had been just one person, they probably would have helped. But because it was a group, and every single one of them, all of us, you right now listening, you have this too, where you assume, because it's a group, if something needed to be done, somebody would do it. It's just an assumption we make. It's fucking retarded, but it's really what's in our brains, and we all do it. So because no one does anything, nobody does anything, right? If it's incredibly frustrating, and it's incredibly true. And so I finally was able to forgive all of those fucking people in that group for not doing anything. However, I have one more story about diffusion of responsibility. Because we are not doomed to be the people who sit around deferring to our instinct to do nothing because no one is doing anything. And keep in mind, this does not happen in a group that has group identity. This happens in any collection of people. So you don't, like, those people weren't in their heads, I'm in a group of people standing on the sidewalk. Like, they're not in a group with each other. They don't have that identity, but it still happens that way. So just remember that this diffusion of responsibility happens in any cluster of people. It's not a groupthink thing even. Angels do surround me, Lori. Thank you. Yes, Chris, exactly. That's what we're going to talk about right now in my next story. By the same token, if somebody in the group does something, Chris says, others in the group usually will too. And that is my next story. Very much shorter and quicker than the first. I was in another bar another night and in my hometown, so I knew everyone in the bar, and I knew all the cops who ended up being involved, and I knew the guy who was getting fucked up, and everybody, because it's a very small town. But we were in there, this old, like, Indian drunk dude, always in the bars and always passed out and always trashed. He's there, he's trashed, of course, as usual, but this time they called the cops on him because he peed in a booth, which is not cool, but also doesn't deserve what happened. But I don't think they meant for it to escalate, obviously. People who call the cops usually don't, but the cops usually escalate things. So the cops arrive, he's passed out, totally dead to the world, like, completely subdued before anyone even tried. And yet they come up to him and they just start tasing him. There's 3 cops for no reason. This is like just a chill bar. People are just chilling, hanging out. He's passed out, but 3 cops had to come in for some reason and just start tasing him. And as they tase him, everyone forms like a circle, like they're backing away from the tasing. And that same diffusion of responsibility happens. It's a passed out guy. He's hella trash drunk. And if you tase somebody more than a few times, they're very likely to have a heart attack. Especially if they're drunk, and especially if they're overweight, and all of these things he was. Nobody did anything about it, because if something needed to be done about it, somebody would do something. Nobody did anything. But I did stand up and say, hey, why are you tasing him? Like, you can stop now. And of course, then the cop came after me with the taser. He stopped shy of me by like a foot and just kind of threatened. It was like, then started threatening everyone. And by then everyone was kind of like, wait, what? This isn't cool. And so just one person not doing diffusion of responsibility and thinking for themselves and doing what might need to be done makes everybody in the group respond. Because just like no one does anything if no one's doing something, somebody doing something makes everyone realize that someone should do something. So this goes both ways, and the point of that is that you have a power in every single group you are in to be the person who stands up and says, wait a second, that's not how this should go. And you might get tased for doing it. And if you are tased for doing it, probably other people won't be as likely to stand up. But you hope that before you are tased, other people will also start to stand up, because once more people start to stand up, then more and more people start to stand up. So you're incredibly powerful. So this one is actually, as disappointing as it is to experience no one standing up, especially if you're in danger, it's very empowering to think of how little effort you actually have to put in to make the whole group sort of shift directions. So keep that in mind. There's some more hope in this diffusion of responsibility. Let's see if there was anything else in this one. Nope. So that was a big one. Diffusion of responsibility. Let's see. Let's see who came. Yeah, I have really fucked up shit happen to me all the time. It'd be cool if I was done now and like nothing else like that is gonna ever happen again. That'd be great. But you can understand why I have developed CPTSD. That's just what happens. What's up, Biggie Smollett in the house? I still hate Oprah, he says. What's funny is she also saved that friend Kelly her life as well. So we've both been saved by Oprah, which is amazing. I love that there's this conversation about how to dress a deer going on now. And this is such a multi-purpose chat and show. It's a beautiful thing. Nothing good happens in bars. I have determined the same thing, Andrew, after years and years of being an asshole drunk. Nothing good happens in bars. The Erie Fairy in the house. What's up? Nice job. Biggie Smollett says he was loud talking the pandemic tonight at the bar, and several people overheard and chimed in agreement. So good things do happen in bars. Okay, we're proven wrong. Good job. It is a good place to be social. I was actually thinking about how bars used to be more like public houses, and you would go there just to like engage with the public, and now they're more places to get trash and make bad decisions, but you know. All right, so the next psychological characteristic related to groupthink that I wanted to get into was entitativity. I don't know how to say this. Let's see if we can get one of those things that pronounces it for us. Say it out loud. I know, I can go to the, like, dictionary thing.
Entitativity.
Entitativity. What a stupid word. Entitativity. So, entitativity is all about, in a social world, a person continually encounters collections of individuals in various social contexts. Sometimes a person perceives these other people to be a meaningful group, other times as a mere aggregate of persons. So it's kind of like I was describing, the people on the sidewalk outside the bar don't necessarily see themselves as part of a group, and neither might some other person observing them. However, if they all started having a discussion about the pandemic and talking with one another, then they might perceive themselves as a group, and so might another person observing them. So they try to sort of determine what makes people see people as a meaning of a group, a member of a group, and what doesn't. It's an interesting thing to look into. Participants of studies consistently sorted the various groups into 4 specific types, and each was characterized by a specific pattern of aforementioned cues. The first group type, intimacy groups, consisted of family members and other small groups whose members interacted a lot and very important to the members. The next type of group, task groups, comprise committees, coworkers, and other smaller interactive groups that exist to get a job done. If we were looking at the sidewalk bar patrons, they might be a task group more than anything else. The third group type is social Oh, maybe they'd be social. Groups such as gender, racial, and national. Oh no, those are more like what I think of as identity groups, which are large and whose members are similar but do not have interaction. Finally, loose associations are made up of people who go to the same school and other groups that are large in size, easy to join or leave, and typically not as important to their members. So these are when people are asked to sort of like define what types of groups there are. They tend to do these four. We have shown that perceivers spontaneously categorize people into these group types and are more likely to confuse members of a task group with another task group than to confuse a task group member with a social category member, etc. So the task group is sort of the loosest. Social category is sort of the most maybe definitive. And the family group is the most personal and emotional maybe. But what's interesting to me is that we seem to treat the social group or that identity group that they're talking about as like almost like a family group. Like we're supposed to like fight and die for our identity group, right? And we see this in these riots and things that go on. And I'm not criticizing them when I say this. I'm just pointing out that you have this identity as a person of color and you see a person of color be harmed. And so you will go out and like fight and die for that. And that is not something that necessarily existed as much in the past unless you're looking at sort of national groups, groups of nationalism, or like a religious group, which would be more like a social group anyway. And so to have these identity groups come to such prominence and such high emotional tension is an interesting phenomenon in our modern world. As far as I'm concerned, it's intentional and it is very easy to manipulate. And that is why I wanted to look at, I already forgot how to pronounce it, entiative groups. A consequence of engaging in more integrative processing of highly entiative groups is that perceivers will spend more time thinking about information presented by groups that are high in contrast to low in entiativity. Hold up, what was the entiativity? Where did we get that brought in? I thought it was just the dividing into groups process. Let's see if it explains it here. Once a person categorizes people into groups, there are a number of consequences for the way he or she processes information and forms impressions about the groups. Unlike individuals about whom a person routinely seeks to form meaningful and coherent impressions, that's an interesting point in itself. If we're meeting a person and getting to know them, we have a lot of room for, you know, nuance, and like shaping our impression of them doesn't happen sort of instantly. Group members are generally thought to be less entiative targets. Okay, so that's what it's about. You have less sort of room for grace almost. It's like you're more likely to characterize them or stereotype them. That's what the entiative part is about. For example, if a person sees an individual person acting in a rude way, he or she might assume that the person is rude, but in contrast, if a person sees a member of a group behaving in a rude way, he or she would probably be less likely to assume that the entire group as a whole comprises rude individuals. Research has shown that perceivers engage in more integrative processing when considering individual targets in contrast to group targets. That is, perceivers are more likely to infer dispositional qualities, assume consistent actions over time, and attempt to resolve any inconsistencies in the behavior of an individual in contrast to a group. So it's easier to sort of dismiss them, judge them, stereotype them, and cast them out if they're a member of a group rather than an individual. This entiative group versus non-entiative group is interesting too. It's like groups where people remain highly individual. So that makes more sense. A consequence of engaging in more integrative processing of highly entiative groups is that perceivers will spend more time thinking about information presented by groups that are high in contrast to low in entiativity. So the more They recognize that members of the group are basically individuals. The more that we will give sort of that same grace and nuance to our identity, or sorry, our analysis of the group or the members therein. So I bet they use that against us too. I bet they try to form groups in our minds of the sort of other, or even ourselves, honestly, and make it less individual and less nuanced, so that we're more likely to adopt and attribute characteristics to the group without seeking further information or without allowing for that idea to change in our mind. That's pretty fascinating as well. This is what I'm saying. These people who run things, they understand all this shit way more than any of us do. And they use it against us intentionally all the time. So it's important to know that. So, you know, you could stop at any point and ask yourself, like, am I treating this as a group or as a person? Even if it is a group, you should probably consider how much are you, you know, solid in your formation of what your ideas about this group are, and how much are you willing to sort of adapt to changing information about them. And we should do that for all groups. We should do that for the KKK. You know, we should do it for any group, good or bad. We should be willing to update our ideas of what they are or are not, or what they are like, or what their members are likely to be like. It's very important that we resist the groupthink in those ways. Let's see. Lori says she never fits into groups. I tend to fall outside the norm. She says I'm the grandma group. Yeah, I think, Lori, actually, that a lot of people in this chat probably agree with you. I think a lot of people who end up in our sort of alternative thinking realm didn't really fit into many groups, or rather we may have fit into many of them but rejected them all. Or we may have retained our identity and our individuality enough that we weren't really welcome in many of them. So I think that that's what we kind of have in common. And and I think it's funny because I don't really even see us as a very uniform group in and of itself. Chris says, sometimes you think you belong in a group and identify with that group, only to find out that groups sucks. For me, it was LGBTQ. I'm gay, but I don't fit in with them. That's awesome, Chris. And that's the one that I think is really important too. It's like, I can't say I don't identify as a woman or I don't fit in the woman group, right? But I feel like LGBTQ is still a social group. It's still a social label. But it's like, you have to, like, if you're gay, you have to be an LGBTQ because you're gay. And like, you know, if you're trans, you have to because you're trans, and this is what that group is. You're in that group. But it's really important for, like, what you're saying, that you realize that just because you are gay or trans or whatever does not mean you have to adopt the agenda or outlook of a group of people who claims to share your identity. It's very important. It's one of those that, I mean, to be honest, you could say the same for women. There's people who are like, we're all feminists because we're women, and so we behave this way. And it's like, well, we're all women, and we might even be a lot of feminists, but we definitely don't have to adopt any sort of social agenda or messaging as though it were just inherent to being women, you know? And that's exactly what we're here talking about, is resisting that tendency to identify and then just adopt, or to identify other groups and, like this Antiativity is talking about, assign them characteristics and stereotypes. We've got Benjamin Crossland in the house. What's up, Benjamin? So one of the things we talked about, Chad, earlier is that the group doesn't always take on a lowest common denominator mindset. In fact, there's a lot to show that many groups can be rational and perform exceptionally well with or without a sort of teamwork training. Random groups that come together can act very coherently and effectively and thoughtfully, and they also don't have to. And so there's a lot of study that goes into like why it may or may not end up that way, but we definitely should always be on the lookout for groups operating at the lowest common denominator, because that happens a lot. Steve says, an individual in a crowd is a grain of sand amid other grains of sand, which the wind stirs up at will. Gustave Le Bon. Yes, and Gustave Le Bon was mentioned earlier in our chat here. The father of some of this group theory. Cheese people are good people, Chris says. I don't know. I like cheese, so I want to agree, but are they? Groups can empower us. Yes, they can. And that's half of the point of this discussion. Groups aren't bad. Identifying with the group so much so that you no longer act as an individual is bad. That's, if I was going to summarize all of this in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. Groups can be incredibly effective, thoughtful, whether they're random and spontaneous or not. But you have to keep your individuality about you. You have to be able to act as an independent individual actor as well. This group is definitely not homogenous. I agree, Andrew. Ugh, I'm sorry, Lacey. It's not just you, I'm sure. I'm sure there's people watch some of my videos afterwards and they're like, I can't hear you. And I play it and I can hear all of it. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Shit gets weird. Entiative. I think you're right, Lacey. Entiative comes from entity. So that was entiative thinking, entiative grouping. We're back to groupthink. Why did I do this one even though we already talked about groupthink? I feel like there was a reason. Let's check. Okay, there was no reason. Group identity. This is the dangerous part. Group identity permits one to be connected to a broader slice of society. These connections may produce feelings ranging from pride to prejudice. In wars between ethnic and religious groups, individuals are prepared to die for the sake of group identity. This is like what I was saying earlier. If you identify with a social group, you know, like LGBTQ, let's say, and then there's a LGBTQ rally and they want to go like storm the Vatican and kill the Pope, then you might suddenly find yourself killing and murdering for this group, even if you don't actually agree with killing and murdering and you don't have anything against the Pope. Everyone's laughing right now because we all have something against the Pope. These powerful emotional reactions have prompted some groups to attempt to manage group identity. An unfortunate example is the use of suicide bombers by terrorist organizations. That is an unfortunate example. Sometimes these things do cause people to distance themselves from the group. If it sort of triggers their like deepest held about themselves and who they are and doesn't agree with them, then that might cause them to leave the group. It is interesting. A lot of times it causes more people to come to the group. People really love, this is something I've noticed in the other sort of podcasters and show hosts that have, that get like a lot more sort of traction than I do. They tend to make strong claims very emotionally and stick to those claims no matter the evidence. And people fucking love that. Like, people want someone to tell them, this is the truth, here's how it is, rah, 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 we're all pumped up about it. You can respond to that because some part of many of us wants to be in a group that's safe, that will protect us, that will tell us sort of how to get through this sort of matrix and all this fucked up shit because it's overwhelming and we're terrified. We're terrified at some level because of all this shit that is overwhelming. And so that can be really, really effective, and that creates a strong group identity, and then people stop questioning that person or the group or their identity within the group or their ability to be an individual in the group, and they just go along. And it's really disturbing and scary to see, and I know some of these people in some of these shows that have that sort of group following them don't even like it. They hate it. They're like, I wish people weren't so thoughtlessly following me. But it is hard, I think, when you have such a strong emotional glue holding your group together. That's maybe part of that entiative action, too, is it adds a sort of glue. Focusing on a particular type of group identity, organizational membership. It was investigated how experiences and community outreach affected the identity process of employee volunteers. Oh, who cares? Why did I read that? That's just saying you change the way you define the group and the qualities that you see in the group, whether you're in it or outside of it. That's a pretty obvious bias. If you're in the religious extremist group, you're going to justify it, rationalize it, just like we saw in the definition of groupthink. And if you're outside of it, you're going to see it, characterize it, and then if it is not entitative, which suicide bombing religious extremists aren't, you're going to more easily classify everyone in it as the same and not give them much benefit of the doubt. So it's kind of repeating the same things. A group identity is one of the reasons that people donate to charitable causes, support friends and family, and exhibit helping behaviors towards those with whom they identify. Alternatively, the group identity precisely by creating an us versus them mentality can produce conflict, discrimination, and prejudice. One need only spend a few minutes watching the national news to see versions of group identification. U.S. citizens boycotted Aruba because of the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. In Iraq, terrorists have killed, kidnapped, and beheaded those sympathetic to U.S. efforts to establish democracy. Yeah, because we're totally just trying to establish democracy. And international soccer games often result in a sea of violence after a match. Clearly, group identity will continue to serve as an important guide to relations within a group, relations between groups, and even relations between countries. It's pretty obvious stuff in this one. I did like this little bit, like it's group identity is part of why people donate to charitable causes and whatever. I don't know. I give money to people who ask for money, basically. I'm kind of a schmuck, so maybe that's my group identity with the human race. So, group identity defines a lot of our behaviors, basically. The Ringelmann effect I had never heard of. This is interesting. Let's check in with the chat, though. Paradigm shifters. We're changing things. That's right, Lori. Membership does not necessarily give you a say. Almost just the opposite. You must submit to the authority. In many groups, that is true. I find the same thing. It's unfortunate. Thank you for pointing that out, Benjamin. You would hope that you have a group where you do have a say and that you don't have to submit to authority. We have a sort of anarchist type of group in Eyes Open, for example, and people say what they think and do what they want. And technically, we have some leadership, but we don't really have much of an authority, which is nice. Groups are super important and powerful, Scott says. The problem is the indoctrination camps most of us go to for our childhoods. Yeah, that fucked us up. And people's minds in general are so low that I just can't relate. I feel you, man. A lot of us feel alienated in this community. Until we found each other, and now we don't feel alienated anymore. Chris says, groupthink is okay, group action is okay. What's not okay is group violence, looting, destruction, using groups to promote love and peaceful protests and make change is okay. It is a good distinction. It's just like you shouldn't just adopt anything and say all of this is bad or all of this is good for the most part. You should do the same through groups and groupthink. There's not all bad. It's not all good. There's just a lot of details about it that you want to keep in mind. So that in the future, if you haven't already started like addressing these things in yourself, that you can be aware of them. So that if you are suddenly asked to run from the cops in a protest, you can stop and go, wait, why? I'll just stand here. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. Or if you are in a sidewalk crowd outside of a bar and you see a girl being dragged away, you will stop and say, actually, let's stop that guy so that person doesn't get hurt. You know, those are just the things you want to be aware of. Or maybe you're looking at a group and you're saying, you know, everybody in the NRA is fucking gun-loving, extremist, racist white guys, so fuck them. You want to stop and say, okay, wait, that's a non-entitative group that I am characterizing and stereotyping. I bet I could find some members, in fact, that aren't that, and maybe I should purposely do that in order to expand my ideas and assumptions, and get rid of my assumptions about groups. You know, we want to look at all the aspects of ourselves in relation to groups and undo the group think, not group think, but just thinking about groups. So let's look at the Ringelmann effect. The Ringelmann effect refers to individuals expending less individual effort on a task when working as part of a group than when working alone. This is one of the ones that was really fascinating for me to read about today because I'm thinking about it now as we've been trained to identify as part of the group, whether this is a class structure thing and we identify as a class, maybe it's a nation thing and we identify as, you know, citizens of the US or whatever country you're in, but some level of our identity in some group has caused us to give up our responsibility for getting shit done and, like, you know, doing it now and doing it well. And that's what this effect is about. It's saying, just like when you're in a group and you give up your, you know, ability to act because you assume someone else will do it if it needs to be done, it's kind of similar to this. This is saying when you're in a group and you're working to get somewhere, you just assume, like, well, other people are helping, so I don't really have to do that much. But if you were working alone to get it done, you would, like, work your ass off maybe, or at least you'd work a little bit more. So this is just describing that tendency that we have to sort of, like, get lazy and get irresponsible and let other people take care of it and just, like, not do as well. And it's pretty interesting. I've seen it in action, as you have too. I mean, literally in, like, group work in school, I've seen it in action, both from my own groups and from, like, as a teacher watching groups, that some people just stop trying as much when you're in a group. And so you would hope that everyone in the group would work just as hard and you would accomplish even more because you're in a group. And that can happen with the right structure, as they point out, if you read this all. But the tendency is for people to get lazy and give up their responsibility to the group, expecting the group to take care of it for them. I think this plays a large part in how we've let shit go in this modern era and sort of stopped doing for ourselves and relied on the sort of nanny state almost and just given up our self-reliance because the group's going to take care of it. The country's going to take care of it, right? Daddy government's going to take care of it, or however we sort of process that over time. It seems that that might be the Ringelmann effect in a national level action, or maybe world level. So it's very fascinating. Since the reemergence of research in this area, several variables have been found to moderate or mediate the extent to which individuals will tend to loaf while performing a group task. A few of these variables are identifiability, personal relevance, group cohesiveness, and task interdependence. It's basically if everyone has a role and they're, you know, given a task, like you're the group recorder and you're the fucking vote tallier and you're the farmer or whatever, then you're more likely to get more shit done. And especially this piece here about personal relevance, if you feel like it's important to you. So those kind of make sense. But you can see if we have been given this sort of national level to identify with, we're not all going to have a role in that. They try to tell us that we do, and I guess they try to instill that in us, like you're a citizen or you're a consumer or whatever. So maybe that's their attempt to sort of have us identify with the group but still get shit done, or participate in the game or whatever. But yeah, fascinating laziness effect, we could call it, or lack of self-responsibility effect going on here. You may want to ask yourself, you know, I saw something that I wanted to laugh at because I'm not super happy with the person who said it, but there was some grain of truth to it that someone posted today in one of the groups that were sort of associated with. Somebody was like, what happened to this group and why is it so shitty now? And someone responded to them like, why, if you think it's shitty, why don't you do something about it instead of just saying so? And that's kind of the Ringelmann effect. Like, you know, if you're part of the group, like you can pull your weight and be responsible and take care of it yourself. Be empowered, right? Let's see what's up in the chat. Anarchy is not feasible, Scott says, because there has to be some kind of minimal organization structure. Well, Scott, that's a misunderstanding of anarchy. Anarchy is not no structure. It's not no leaders. It's no rulers. And so anarchy can be very organized, very structured, and be full of leadership and even hierarchy at some level, in some way, but there's just no rulers. There's no one that is making the rules and enforcing them on others. It is a group process of creating sort of rules and enforcing them. And that's the difference between anarchy and all other forms of government. So it's a very common misunderstanding about anarchy, and I totally get where it comes from. But anarchy does not mean no structure. So Interesting to know, and please spread the word, because almost no one understands anarchy. James True's ideas of bioregionalism with direct democracy. That is a very old idea. It's not James True's idea. There are many for decades and decades, and it actually comes from anarchy. So that actually is an anarchist ideology for bioregionalism to take hold and to have those zones where people are then within that region anarchistically responsible for ruling themselves. It's very interesting. The bioregion of Cascadia, for example, has been, ever since I was involved in politics in the late 90s, has been an idea, and I know it started much before then. And Cascadia would be sort of Washington, part of BC and Canada, Idaho, I think over to the Rocky Mountains in Montana, and then down through a lot of northwestern Oregon as well. So that would be that bioregion. And I was a big proponent, and still am a big proponent, of Cascadia and other bioregions. But yeah, you should know they are actually an anarcho idea, and James True is a huge proponent of that. And I don't even know if he knows that has been an idea long before he started promoting it, and we should all promote it. They're great ideas to do that. James has great ideas. His books are amazing as well. I don't know how far behind I am in this chat, so hopefully I'm not like way behind, but you guys are talkative tonight. I love it. Scott points out a lot of people, in fact, join groups just to pass off their own personal responsibilities. Good point. They are like desiring the Ringelmann effect. They want that. That's a really good point. Hi, Hell is watching. Nice to see you again. Bye, Chris. See you later. All right, so back to our next piece, system justification. This is kind of self-evident too if you think much about it, but we'll just look into it. System justification refers to a social psychological propensity to defend and bolster the status quo. That is, to see it as good, fair, legitimate, and desirable. A consequence of this tendency is that existing social, economic, and political arrangements tend to be preferred, and alternatives to the status quo are disparaged. System justification refers, therefore, to an inherently conservative tendency to defend and justify the status quo simply because it exists, sometimes even at the expense of individual and collective self-interest. So this is on a massive group level. Within a group, you're going to have a system often, especially if you're talking about a group as nation as group, government as group. And so the tendency for members of this group is to justify that system and to continue it ongoing forever. It's just like objects in motion tend to stay in motion. It's the same sort of concept. It's like, this already exists, so let's keep going with it. It's way easier than changing things. It's way less terrifying than going into the unknown. So we will defend it, sometimes to the death, even if it doesn't make sense and isn't in our best interest and is illogical. We see that so heavily right now that it's crazy. People just do not want to look at what's going on. And we've seen it always. I guess just right now it seems to be coming to a head because it seems more acute and personally dangerous to each of us. What's happening now? Much more threatening. But hell is always watching. George Washington, an anarchist? Dude, no way. Man, you guys, I have to play this really quick, just because we're talking about George Washington, and also because we can check to see if I can play YouTube videos yet with the sound working. Oh my god, what am this is not what sorry. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this. I want this. And I want you to be able to hear it. Tell me if you can hear it. If not, we'll stop playing it. Never mind. Okay, well, everyone should go check out this video. It's hilarious and awesome, and it's about George Washington. And I will put the link in the chat in case you want to have a delightful experience. So system justification, we justify the systems we're a part of, we justify the systems within the groups that we identify with, even if it's bad for us, even if it's illogical. The successful rationalization of the status quo is associated with the reduced negative effect and the satisfaction of basic epistemic and existential needs. Threat management and uncertainty reduction, basically, for everyone in the system. However, the long-term consequences of system justification can differ for members of advantaged and disadvantaged groups, obviously. Right? If you're the king and the queen, then it definitely behooves you for shit to keep going the way it is, whereas if you're the peasant, it might not. Whereas members of advantaged groups experience increased self-esteem and subjective well-being to the extent that they engage in system justification, members of disadvantaged groups who buy into the legitimacy of the system suffer in self-esteem and subjective well-being and hold more ambivalent attitudes about their own group membership. Wow. I didn't realize that part. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but members of disadvantaged groups who buy into the legitimacy of the system suffer in self-esteem and subjective well-being. That is so sad. You're like the oppressed part of the group and you still justify the system and keep it going, and it like kills your soul. Psychology doesn't acknowledge the soul, but it's pretty clear. May have detrimental consequences for society as a whole. System justification might. Although there are hedonic benefits associated with minimizing the unjust and oppressive aspects of everyday life, processes of rationalization inhibit the motivation to change and improve the status quo, thereby undermining efforts to reform society's institutions and to redistribute social and economic resources in a just manner. So it's always been something I've thought about, like the rich and the sort of ruling class, like they have actually a vested interest in keeping everyone happy and sort of just like moving along, happy enough to keep moving along with the system, and yet they seem to always want to tend toward not keeping that going. But this sort of explains that motion, that self-perpetuating motion and justification of the system. Of course, you're going to continue to exacerbate the exact characteristics that got you into the ruling class and kept you rich, and more so. And so they're going to just exacerbate more and more the lacks in your society. And then that's going to spur destruction. So it's like, you'd think that they'd be forward thinking enough to be like, maybe we'll like prevent utter destruction and still stay comfortable. But no. Loud but heard. Oh, yeah, I guess you could hear it, but you'd just be hearing it through my microphone instead of the actual, like, it'd still be frustrating, basically. There's no reason it shouldn't be coming through the program to you, but anyway, moving on. System justification is a thing. Objects and motions tend to stay in motion. These are some of these horrifying not groupthink, but thinking about groups and their behaviors. Social studies, psychological studies that we've all sort of heard about that have very exceptionally disturbing results. And some of these are supposedly fake. And so you want to take it with a grain, like everything, with a grain of salt. It could be fake. Everything we've talked about so far could be fake, but we've seen some of it in action, and so we know from our own experience that some of this does happen. But this is the experiment, sorry I should have said, by Stanley Milgram. And the question the article poses is it an obedience to authority or is it just conformity? Either way, it's horrible, the outcome. But this intends to explain why humans are cruel. Milgram, the guy who runs this, wanted to investigate why people can be cruel in war, but so he scaled it down onto a lower level. The experimental situation into which people were put was initially straightforward. Participants were told they were involved in a learning experiment, that they were to administer electrical shocks, and that they could continue to the end of the experiment, or they should continue to the end of the experiment. They were told they would be the teacher and another person the learner. So they were given authority as a teacher, which inherently shouldn't have authority in it, but I understand that it does in everybody's mind, and so that's an effective role to choose to give this person automatic perceived authority in themselves. And the other person, the learner, would automatically put them in that position of being sort of lorded over. They sat in front of a machine with a number of dials labeled with steadily increasing voltages. This was the shock machine. The third switch from the top was labeled danger, severe shock, and the last two simply XXX. So you know that you shouldn't press the XXX button unless you want some hardcore porn. Washington is like the god. Just going back to George Washington in the chat, people are still talking about him. George Washington is like the god of the Freemasons. They literally believe he achieved apotheosis, which is becoming a god. And there's the mural at the top of the Washington rotunda or whatever, the dome in the building. And it has a painting like a fucking Michelangelo and shit up there, and it's called the Apotheosis of George Washington, and that is disturbing, but interesting. So during the course of the experiment, back to the experiment, each time the learner made a mistake, the participant was ordered to administer an ever-increasing electrical shocks. Of course, the learner kept making mistakes, so the teacher, or the participant in the study, had to keep giving higher and higher electrical shocks and hearing the resultant screams of pain until finally the learner went quiet. The person who is the learner was an actor, made to, act out ever-increasing electrical shock. And of course, them going quiet was meant to be like they had passed out or died. When the participant balked at giving electrical shocks, the experimenter, who is also an authority figure dressed in a white lab coat, ordered them to continue. Participants were not, in fact, delivering electrical shocks. The learner in the experiment was actually an actor following her script. The learner was kept out of sight of the participants, so they came to their own assumptions about the pain they were causing. They were, however, left in little doubt that towards the end of the experiment, the shocks were extremely painful, and the learner might well have been rendered unconscious. When the participant balked at giving the electrical shocks, the experimenter, an authority figure dressed in a white lab coat, ordered them to continue. They repeated that part, but whatever. Again, they should hire me to write these things. Come on, guys. Before I explain the results, try to imagine yourself as a participant. Yeah, I always have imagined myself, and I know for sure I wouldn't keep giving the shocks no matter what a fucking lab coat dude said to me, but I have always been astounded that anybody would. I don't know who these people are who will do this, but apparently it's like 8 out of 10 people did or something, or worse. I think they'll tell us later. However far you think, you're probably underestimating, as that's what most people do. I actually know myself. Like, I know I wouldn't. I think most people would agree, but I think most people in this chat probably wouldn't, because I think a lot of us are very independent thinkers. But like the experiment, the results shocked. Ha ha ha. Milgram's study discovered people are much more obedient than you might imagine. 63% of the participants continued right until the end. Oh, 63. So 6 out of 10. I was a little high, actually. They administered all the shocks, even when the learner screaming in agony, begging to stop, and eventually falling silent. These weren't specially selected sadists. They were ordinary people like you and me who had volunteered for a psychological study. Again, some people say this never happened. I would love to redo this study and see if it's the same now. But the social psychology experiment appeared to show beautifully how much social situations can influence people's behaviors. I would say how much group identity influence behaviors. If you identify yourself as an authority figure over this other person, and you have authority figure above you, and these are the groups, and you see the power structure within them, you don't want to be out of your group. I don't know. This was interesting, however. They say, think again. Sure, the experiment relies on the situation to influence people's behavior, but how real is the situation? If it was you, surely you would understand on some level that this wasn't real, and that you weren't really electrocuting someone, and that knocking someone unconscious would not be allowed in a university study. How good would the actors have to be in order to avoid giving away the fact that they were actors? Also, people pick up considerable nonverbal cues from each other. How good would the actors have to be in order to avoid giving... They already said that. People are adept at playing along, even with those situations they know in their heart of hearts to be fake. So maybe that was going on too. I don't know. It is a pretty terrifying experiment and a terrifying result if real. And I like to think that it wouldn't happen. But again, I watched a group of people do nothing as I was in real life actually not acting and being carried away. So I don't know what people are capable of, man. But it's an interesting possibility. Your identity and part of a group and your belief in authority and training, really, in authority can make you do some horrible things, perhaps. And the Stanford prison experiment is another one that has been brought into question about whether or not it was real, or whether or not people could tell it was fake and so acted, you know, in extreme ways just to skew the data, or whether or not you know, anybody really took this seriously or whatever. You could question all of that, and it's worth questioning. But in the basic scenario, these people, it was very similar to the previous one in that people were given authority. So the idea was simple: to see how ordinary men, chosen to be the most healthy and normal, would respond to radical change in their normal roles in life. Half were to become prison guards, the other half prisoners. In this experiment, there were no half measures. For it to be effective, it had to be closely approximate to the real experience of prisoner and guards. These participants were in for the ride of their lives. Prisoners were arrested by a police car with sirens wailing until they were going about their everyday business. They were fingerprinted, blindfolded, put in a cell, stripped naked, searched, deloused, given a uniform, a number, and had a chain placed around one foot. That is pretty extreme. You would definitely be feeling that even if you were in a study. Other participants were made into guards who wore uniforms and were given clubs. A prison was mocked up in the basement of Stanford University building. I don't know how you can mock up a prison, so that part's questionable too. And so the experiment began. All was quiet until the second day. The prisoners rebelled. The guards' retaliation was swift and brutal. Guards stripped the prisoners naked, removed the beds from the prison, and replaced the rebellion's ringleader in solitary confinement, and began harassing all the prisoners. So already, like, this isn't scripted. This is just how they're behaving. It is interesting, and I will say that teachers like myself who are placed suddenly in authority for the first time, you do feel an immense pressure to control your subjects because you know it's expected of you. And as much as I am an anarchist and hate control, I tried to find as many ways where I was empowering students and honoring their individuality and letting them sort of choose how to run a classroom and make their own rules and all these things, but you still find yourself doing things that you might never have otherwise done in order to maintain order. And that's just on a very slight level, you know, for me, is like just in a classroom and my own morality. So I can imagine people who have never even really thought of these ideas being thrown into this and just kind of going crazy with it. Just as my own personal subjective experience. Lots of people, they say, became engrossed in their new roles. And so, I guess they're just pointing out, again, this identity with a role or this identity with a group. You're like, oh, I'm a prison guard. This is my group, and this is how we act, and this is what we do. If I don't behave, you know, in line with this, in accordance with this, and accomplish my goal, then I will be outgrouped and ostracized. And so they're pointing out that this happens in real prisons and other such things too. It happens in places like Abu Ghraib, where otherwise normal people are suddenly doing atrocious, horrifying things to other humans. Again, because they perceive themselves as part of one group and the others as part of another group. So this is a very well-known study. You probably were familiar with it at some level. Just wanted to revisit the horror of it and what it indicates about our ability to identify with a group and lose ourselves. I don't remember why I chose this. Oh, maybe it was the false consensus. Let's check in with the chat though. We are the authority of ourselves. Let's say that. If we don't need other authorities, and if we don't even recognize other authority except in ourselves or our higher selves or our God or whatever we want to call that, then maybe we're much less likely to sort of fall into that in-group, out-group idea as far as authority goes. Scott Cook is our white knight, never backing down from a savior moment. See, and this is a really good point, Scott, of our identity. So you're identifying as part of a group of people who would be like white knights or saviors, and even that can be dangerous for you. And I'm not trying to like single you out or criticize you, but that's exactly the level of of analysis I'd like us to all have is like, which groups have we identified ourselves with, even if they're really good, like white knight saviors? And how might that then color what we actually end up doing in real life, especially in an emotional heightened situation? Will we act without thought if we have identified as this thing? Self-identity is complex, and it is really excellent if we can know that about ourselves and know which identities we have and start to sort of peel apart what that might actually be influencing in our behavior and thinking. If nothing else, for just the action of looking deeper at it and wondering, you may like what you see and keep it there. You may see, oh wait, maybe I don't like that. Maybe this would lead me astray at some point. Good to look and see. Benjamin Crossland asks, at Rogueways, did you feel anything bestowed on you after engaging that cop? Like you passed a test and here is your award. No, unfortunately. All they felt was scared because he suddenly was coming after me with a taser. And then even though other people in the group started to sort of, you could tell that they sort of shifted and changed and started to be like, yeah, this isn't right. Other people like abandoned me and like sort of moved away from me too. And so in fact I felt like more ostracized and sort of abandoned, but I was proud of myself for doing it, because people I think should do it. And honestly, I didn't even do it as like this is what people should or shouldn't do. I was just like, dude, that guy's gonna die if no one says anything, so someone has to, and I guess I'm the only person thinking right here. So no, I really did not. Although I passed my own test, and I give myself an award for doing it. So how about that? All right, so false consensus. I'm going to skim this because I feel like there was something, but I don't remember what it was. I guess it's just talking about our assumptions and biases and that they're almost always wrong. So that should be pretty obvious too. If we're like projecting ideas onto someone, I just had someone do this to me the other day. They're like, well, you do this, and so you must do it all day long, and it must take like all your energy and thought and da da da. And I'm like, no, I mean, I don't even know where you would get that. Like, it's a very subconscious background part of myself that I, just like breathing almost. It takes almost no energy, but it's interesting that somebody would have assumed this in this situation, and it's just one of many times where it makes me wonder, how often are we making these assumptions and projecting them onto people without doing much investigation about whether or not they're correct? It's really cool if you can get to the point where you're making assumptions. It's really, really hard to know you're doing it, though. You have to be pretty intentional and look over kind of everything you say and think and do and say, like, how much of this did I just assume an outcome or an answer or a characteristic of, especially of other people and their motivations. And my worst assumption I make, being a poor intuitive psychologist, is I almost always assume that people are kind of like hating on me or like working against me. And this is that if you watch the Russell Babbitt interview, we talked about the schizoid personality type, and my therapist told me many years ago that I was sort of schizoid personality. And it's not schizophrenic at all, it's just like a type of personality. And one of the aspects that makes her say that is that I assume that people are hateful towards me and working against me, more than not that I just assume that all the time about everyone, but that I am more likely to assume that than that people are supporting me and rooting for me. So we'll put it that way. And this is an example of being a poor intuitive psychologist, because most people are not rooting against me or working against me, and I know that, but I will still assume it more than I'll assume the opposite. If you give me a choice, I'll assume the worst about you. But don't worry, you guys in the chat and other people, I'm not assuming it about you. You're here supporting me right now, so you're clearly not working against me, but in the unknown, it's my assumption. So I guess just this idea that if something seems really obvious to you, perhaps that's the best time to ask yourself if it's an assumption or not, and if you have any evidence to support it. So I guess I just wanted to point that out, that we're all kind of prone to trusting our intuition as far as like other people's motivations and characteristics go, and that it much more has to do with ourselves than them when we're doing it in this sort of psychological way. I'm not saying don't trust your intuition as far as like situations and or even relationships or experiences in life go, or or whether or not you are finding sort of truth and which direction you're going to go in life. All those things you should have some intuition and learn to trust that and evaluate that. But this specific aspect of understanding people's psyches supposedly is I get why we're often wrong. We're not as intuitive as we think in that way. We have social identities. We already talked about this. This is one of many sort of experiments. I think the experiments we already looked at test the same sort of thing, where you need very little input to start identifying with a group. You could end up at a sort of train station with a bunch of random strangers at the same time and have no sort of cohesion at all or any identity with that group, but one small piece of input or one small sort of problem can occur, and it can kind of start to unify you and gel you in this group that you never wanted. So it's this idea that we can create groups very simply, and I wanted to not even go through this, but just mention it because I think they use this against us all the time as well, and that we're very easily manipulated when we are just assigned a group. Even, right? If somebody walked into the train station and said, okay, all of you guys are in group B, and that was it, and they walked away, you already now in your mind have an association with the rest of the people in this train. So you might not even understand it. You might start guessing about why you're all group B, but now you're already starting to gel as a group. And I think the news does this to us, even with like neuro-linguistic programming. They do this to us, even in the way that they consistently refer to us as consumers. They do this to us. And then we're easily manipulated. We're easily corralled and sort of pushed into various different courses of action in this way. They definitely do it to us as far as political groups, Democrat, Republican, it's either or. And so we just want to be aware of how easy it is to be made to feel as part of a group. And especially because when that's happening to us, we want to notice it and just remember, like, I'm not actually connected with these people more than I am with every other human. And so I want to keep my individuality, and I want to be critical of what's happening right now and make sure that I act independently. And we already went over this, so I don't know why I pulled this up again, but this is that same bystander apathy is another word for diffusion of responsibility that we talked about, where people don't do anything because no one is doing anything. So obviously there's also the group psychology of conforming to the norm. When you're in any kind of group, norms are set, whether you know it or not, whether it's intentional or not. They are set either by the behavior that's accepted or not accepted, or by direct rules, that are stated outright. And so you learn the norms really quickly, whether you mean to or not. Babies are learning the norms is from the second they come out and start sensing things. So we're all always sort of developing our subconscious, at least, if not conscious, idea of what the norms are. And the norms are very hard to first start to identify as norms that were given to you and not necessarily absolute truths. And also to then break when you don't agree with them, or to even decide and realize that you don't agree with them. So just like you can be made to adopt a group identity very, very easily, you can also be made to adopt norms very, very easily. For example, right now, all of a sudden, everyone you know and see is wearing masks, and that is now a norm. And that took maybe like a week or two to happen. But now more and more people do it because more and more people are doing it, and it's more and more normal, unfortunately. So this is another aspect of group identity that we want to be very aware that it is incredibly easy to create and direct behavior through these psychological impulses and phenomena in ourselves. So we think about all of that and we go back to this event. And there's so much group think involved in this. It's really, really hard to even parse it all out. But we already sort of talked about, just in this headline, right? A white cop. So now there's the white group already brought into this. There's the cop group brought into this. There's the black group brought into this. You might even say there's the man group brought into this, but I don't think that's as much. So we've got already these three groups. There's white, there's black, and there's cop, and there's non-cop. I guess there's four groups that are instantly brought into this. So you, if at any level you have ever before identified with any of those groups, you already now look at this before you even know the facts, before you even understand what happened. You're already looking at it through the lens of, I'm a cop, let's say, right? So if you're the cop, you have that system justification psychology going on. You have your your group think going on, where you want to continue being a member of it. You want to continue keeping your internal cohesion going. All of these things are coming in now, and you're already coming at it now from that point of view, and you're looking now at these other groups and all your preconceived notions that you have about people in that group, that entiative group, non-entiative group, that is therefore more likely to be stereotyped, less likely to be given grace and nuance, less likely to be updated. You're looking at all those groups now through those lenses and developing your conclusions and your intuition, which isn't really intuition at all in these cases. It's just your bias, right? So we already have those things going on into this. We already have made this a group on group on group incident before we even know what's going on. I mean, literally, before we knew what happened, people who identify with the group of black people or with the group of white people are both in it on a side. And I want to point out that a lot of the people in a group that identifies as white are in a place in modern society where they're, allies, right? We're like allies of oppressed groups. So a lot of white people are like very virtue signaling and very like quick to be like, I'm on black people's sides, I'm an ally. And again, I'm not. That's cool. Be an ally, like help oppressed groups. That's awesome. But we have those things coming into play. And so white and black people both who are identifying this just instantly are like, fuck cops and let's fucking do something about this. It's cool to stand up against oppression and cop violence and go protest these things. It's awesome. Do it. And it's another thing to do it without thinking and without identifying from what point of view am I coming from, have I looked at all the facts, and what is actually the best course of action, in my opinion. That would be the best place to come from, knowing what we know about how easily manipulated we are through our group psychology. Right? So we have a lot of that going on. This guy supposedly committed forgery. He appeared to be under the influence. He's a male in his 40s. I'm kind of surprised they didn't, if this was in any way fake or a setup, that they didn't use like a younger person who was kind of more like punk or whatever. That's not the right word, but counterculture, I don't know. Just like easier for people to hate, sort of. So that's one thing that makes me think it's probably real, especially he's like a civil rights lawyer. Like, then again, they could want to use a civil rights lawyer to make it even more, divide between the civil rights people and the non-civil rights people or whatever. So he died. Where did I put my water, you guys? Oh, I found it. But again, there's some nuances that we wanted to look at and see, what did actually happen. Someone I know who is Jay Ritchie, he's been on the show before. He does War on Morons. It's a hilariously funny skit podcast show about current events and political happenings, and it's really funny. It's a good time if you want to just like chill out and not get so serious all the time. But Jay Ritchie is a sort of wrestling guru, and he pointed out that it did seem like the cop had a wrestling pose where he had one knee holding all of his weight, and it wasn't the knee that was on the guy's neck. So he runs a wrestling organization. He's the head of it, and he organizes and participates in wrestling events all of the time. And so he knows all of these sort of kayfabe, like fake move things. And he was like, it heavily looks like that cop was not actually putting weight on him. So that's interesting. You know, it's one possibility. It could be that that's not true at all, and that he absolutely had all his weight on him. We don't know, but I like to question all these things rather than just jump into the group and start pretending like you know exactly what happened and what you should do about it. So that's interesting. Oops. I guess I also wanted to talk about and I thought I had a thing pulled up for it, but I don't, about the group mentality involved in the protests. Again, we talked about how you can come together with these people who believe what you believe, which is that cops should be held accountable and that they shouldn't power trip, and especially in the way that causes harm to other people, and especially not when it then results in death. And especially then they should be treated just like anyone else who murders somebody. And so, a lot of people can agree with that. And you should go and stand up for yourself and express yourself and try to accomplish justice in this area. And then, of course, what do you need if you're a person who wants to either make these protests end real quick or get demonized so that people don't support them, or even stoke them to the point where they explode and perhaps spread into other areas as a really nice distraction from other things going on? What do you need to do to make a group behave as you want it to? Well, you've seen a lot of things that you can do to make a group behave the way you want it to. One of them is to get somebody to adopt a leadership role within the group and then start leading them. It's very easy to do if this group is loose and anarchical and doesn't have a leader, and you send someone in who, just like we talked about, some other shows have characters like this who are very passionate and very sure of themselves, right? Just like the guy with the protest I was at, there's like, the cops are coming, let's run to the streets, and like do whatever in the streets. I don't even know what the goal was. Just like that, though, you send one person in to yell something like that and like kind of lead the charge, and like people are gonna go for it often if they have de-individuated and lost their identity to this group and stopped thinking about what their actual goal is and what they want to accomplish. If you do something like that, now all of a sudden you can have someone who's like, cool, now let's break this fucking window. Now let's light this thing on fire. Now let's go in and just take diapers for some reason. That makes sense. And cause all of this shit to happen. And so, unfortunately, that can happen, and those agent provocateurs can be placed very easily. We've seen it over and over again. Many protests I was at or a part of, at many protests I wasn't, you see people who are sent in and suddenly they're screaming for people to start burning things and smashing windows, and sometimes the group doesn't, and they're like, no, we're not going to do that. Just like I stopped and was like, actually, I don't want to run into the street with you for no reason. And that can happen because, like we said too, groups can actually have an internal sort of rational logic to them, and they can resist that. But it's very easy to send those people in. It's very easy to have agent provocateurs lead things astray. And then, unfortunately, a lot of people who are very emotional, understandably, and who are wanting something to be done, and maybe they've had decades of their own racist experiences and their own sort of fear of cops, and it's all sort of coming out at once. And they can be led to do a lot of things that are pretty horrible and actually anti-productive, counterintuitive, counterproductive to their goals, their stated goals. And so that's really unfortunate that people can be led astray in such a way. And I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to point out about it, but it slipped my mind. So I'll head to the chat real quick before I wrap things up. Holy shit. How do I end up doing 2 hours? 2 hours. It's Scott asks, where do I learn more about the philosophy of anarchy and related ideas? Noam Chomsky's book on anarchy is quite good if you want to look into that. Noam Chomsky, some may disagree with him or dislike him or whatever, or think he's like a fucking shill or whatnot, but he's a very astute academic, and he covers, in I think, a great amount of honesty, the history of anarchy and its related ideas. So that would be a really good place to start, in my opinion. However, if you want to watch somebody and listen to somebody talk about it who is incredibly intelligent and effective, Larken Rose, Larken. Rose is an awesome guy, and he understands anarchy very deeply as well. And so that might be an easier sort of way. It just depends. Like, do you like to read and make notes and stuff, or do you want to listen, or maybe both? Super, super good idea to do that. I wish everybody would study anarchy, and then I wish everyone would do it. All you have to do to make anarchy happen is just start behaving in an anarchical way. That's what I think. You should consider it deeply. Oh, I guess you guys are talking about your own anarchy book. I'm not sure. I missed it, but it's probably rad, whatever it is, because people in this group are rad. Buffering again. Dude, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know if they're fucking with me or if there's just actual issues with the video, but hopefully you can hear the shit, most of it, and hopefully they're not buffering over, like, the best parts of the anti-rioting message. I think the guy was having a heart attack. Hell is watching says, yeah, that's the other possibility, is that this guy was, maybe high or maybe not even high. Maybe he's having a fucking aneurysm or some shit. Like, your brain can do weird ass shit sometimes. And then if people just sort of think that you're crazy and attack you, like, that sucks. He could be having all kinds of medical experiences going on. And honestly, if he was, that could contribute to his death, whether or not the police officer did use extreme force or not. So there's yet another reason to stop and pause and just wonder what actually happened and what is actually the appropriate response. And almost always the appropriate response is not going to include destroying random businesses and parts of your city, in my opinion. Oh, I guess everybody disappeared because the chat quit or something. I don't really know what happened, but we'll see how many people are left and what the video turns out as. So for my conclusion, I would like to remind you to think. You actually have the choice, and you have the ability to do anything in any situation. So, given the main sort of aspects of your power and I don't know what's happening. You guys are asking me if I'm here. Maybe you'll get my chats. I don't know. But the questions become, will you stand by and watch as horrible things happen? Just because, you assume that someone would do something if it needs to happen or whatever, or that there might be an authority in your group that would stop you from acting. Some people are still here. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Will you think for yourself? Will you remember you're an individual, actually, no matter what group you've identified with, no matter what group. And I really want you to think hard about what groups you've identified with, because especially as far as this alternative community of thinkers goes, people have the tendency to create groups even in our world, even though we know how dangerous these are and how they can be used against us, how they can be co-opted, how leadership can be replaced with people who are paid off. All of these things, we still make groups and identify with them. And so I really want you to ask yourself, like, what groups have I identified with? Even and especially if you're an eyes open person, ask yourself, if I identified as an eyes open, as a group, like, do I identify with it? And maybe you do, and maybe there's nothing harmful in that yet, but then just be aware of it so that if something does come up, and maybe I get turned or something and I start asking you to do crazy shit, you'll resist it. Because you just want to be aware. You just want to know what groups you have identified with so that you can try to re-individuate yourself and assert your independence as a thinker who doesn't rely on a leader or a group to determine your behavior or your thoughts. Will you question authority? I'm sure you will in this group, because that's basically what we do. We definitely question authority, so that's great. But make sure you are really actually doing it. Again, if you're in a group and you've identified with the group and there is an authority figure, like your favorite podcast or show host, do you treat them like an authority? I mean, really, you shouldn't. They're just people. I'm just a person. James True is just a person. I'm only saying him because he came up in this show. You know, any podcast you listen to, that is just a person. They're flawed. They fuck up. They make mistakes. They have days where they're like shitty and crazy. I do. We all do. Don't put any of us on a pedestal. And don't ever, let us determine the way you think or believe or what don't take it as gospel. Like, I really need to remind myself to not take these people as gospel. Larkin Rose, Noam Chomsky, anybody. Just, they're not authorities. They're just people. You can respect their abilities. They might have more than you, less than you, whatever, but don't put them on the pedestal. Will you question your group identities? As in, am I actually even a part of this group, right? Am I part of a group called women? Like, technically, but like, do I identify as it? Like, no, not really, actually. So just like, think about those things. Will you act independently and with self-responsibility, not waiting for the group to take care of it? Again, if you're in a group, you're like, well, I'm in this cool group and we like read books together and whatever. And, someday somebody should probably like figure out if we want to like do more with the group or not, but I'll just wait until they do it. Like, do it yourself, be the leader. That's pure anarchy. That's actual anarchy, when you realize something needs to be done and you just do it. Will you purposely seek out group members and their opinions? And this one is very important. If you're in a group and you have this, you tend to have sort of echo chambery types of things. You tend to just see the things everyone else in the group is seeing and thinking. We go outside of that. Like, I purposely go watch normie news shit to see like, what are the fucking mainstream people thinking and doing right now? And then I try to talk to some of them and be like, why do you think this? And what's going on? And what's your evidence? And whatever, in a non-confrontational way, so that I can actually learn. Because how do we know what we're doing is right or good or true if we only look at it from one perspective? We want to purposely find the people who are not in our group, and we want to seek out their ideas and determine why they do what they do. Biggie Smollett asks, what would you do if you had to give it all for freedom? I mean, I know I've said, and I'll say it again, if somebody comes here and tries to force something into my body, I would die for it. That's my freedom. So I have no boundaries as far as freedom goes, I think. But we'd have to see in a moment, right? 6 minutes. Wow, that's a long time. It's a long time. I hate when they start fucking with shit like that, but we're going to wrap up real quick here. School should start with that PowerPoint. Think every day. I like it. That's a good idea. In fact, school should only teach thinking skills and stop at that. Let subject matter be a thing of the past and just teach thinking skills, and then it'd be like a library. You just go learn about whatever the fuck you want to. Now that you know how to think. Have some people around to like bounce ideas off of, and that's my idea of my anarchist school. Pedestal somewhat deserved. You may be surprised. I mean, I think I'm pretty cool, but I'm just a lady. I have all kinds of fucked up shit going on, but I do my best to be fair and balanced and whatever. I just, respect should definitely be granted to everyone. I agree, Benjamin Crossland, until they destroy it, and then maybe it should be rescinded. Andrew Berseno says, in the famous, to Mexicans, statement of Benito Juarez, el respeto del derecho ajeno es la paz, which translated means the respect of the rights of others is peace. I love that. Thank you. So to wrap things up, you obviously have a whole entire world and society of influences around you, and every single one of them, I would argue, is asking you to identify as part of a group. This is a key to advertising. It's a key to government control. It's a key to just creating unity in an actual group. And so you want to think about all these various things that ask you to be a member of the group. It's every social media platform you're a part of, the subgroups you're part of within those social media platforms. This show asks you to be part of the group of the, Rogueways Warriors. Maybe the music you listen to is asking you to be part of a group. Like I'm a hip hop person, and that's an identity you have. Everything. Books you read, all of it. It's all asking you to be a part of a group. And so this is all around you all day, every day at very, very many levels. And it is really, really going to behoove you to identify all of those and ask yourself if you actually belong to a real group in any of them. And if so, how that affects your thinking, the way you look at the world, and how you behave within it, and whether or not you have maintained your individuality and your identity within it, because that is the most important thought throughout all of this presentation, is that you have a choice about which lens you look at the world through, and you have a choice about whether or not to analyze and look at the lenses which you have chosen to adopt. So finding out which ones they are, finding out how they have affected your view, whether or not they've turned them upside down, and whether or not you want to maybe turn them a different direction or grab a different lens is very, very important. So be sure you are in balance with all of those things. You have maintained yourself as the fulcrum, and the other influences, they're there, but you have balanced them out and decided how, if at all, they affect you and what you are doing. And so until you are a rock of solidity, of individual, independent, individuated self in balance with all of the influences around you, and you can be part of the group while not subjecting yourself and losing yourself to the irrational throes of the group, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak, while the tongue feeds a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God gets booed is sorcery. To recreate a God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Penio. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me, yo?
From the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional 3 ain't beating me on top of the 4th. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forged with ink drizzle, branch down. Try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter, let they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo. Bioengineered morsels, conversing with machine elves. Bypassing baggage, they stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the backs of the savage. Them clasped hands at the Sabbath. Smack of energy damage, they done twisted the tongues. With nanotech in the lungs, the awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking
run.